Welcome to the spooky side of the internet. Fellow Fright fans, tonight we're unraveling two spooky stories that will make your skin crawl. Prepare to meet a timepiece that's ticking towards your demise and a mirror that shows you what's to come. Grab your blankets, turn off the lights, and let's get scared. The Death Clock. On a bleak autumn afternoon, Jonathan Moore wandered through the narrow, cobblestone streets of an old town, his eyes scanning the various stalls at a local flea market. A passionate collector of antiques, Jonathan found solace in the forgotten relics of the past, each item carrying a story that he longed to uncover. That day, amidst the cluttered tables and dusty shelves, something caught his eye, a pocket watch, unlike any he had ever seen. The watch was encased in a small, weathered velvet box, its golden surface tarnished by age, yet still gleaming under the dim light of the overcast sky. Intricate engravings covered its surface, and on the lid, an inscription in Latin, Tempus Mortis, was etched deeply into the metal. The watch seemed to pulse with a life of its own, drawing Jonathan closer, compelling him to reach out and touch it. Without hesitation, he asked the vendor for the price. The vendor, an elderly man with leathery skin and eyes that seemed to have witnessed the world's darkest secrets, regarded Jonathan with a look of pity mixed with caution. "Son," the old man's voice was raspy and low, as if it were being drawn from deep within, "this watch is no ordinary trinket. It carries a curse that has claimed the lives of every person who ever owned it." Jonathan laughed, dismissing the man's words as the typical superstition often used to add allure to old objects. "I don't believe in curses," Jonathan replied, his fingers curling around the watch, feeling its cold weight in his hand. "I'll take it." The old man sighed heavily, accepting the money with a resigned nod. As Jonathan walked away, the vendor's ominous warning echoed in his mind, but he quickly brushed it aside, attributing it to mere theatrics. That night, Jonathan placed the watch on his bedside table and settled into bed. Yet, as he lay in the darkness, a sense of unease crept into his thoughts. The room felt different, the air thick with an invisible presence that pressed against his chest. He drifted into a restless sleep, plagued by nightmares. In his dreams, he was surrounded by shadows, their whispers incomprehensible, yet filled with malice. He saw a coffin, and inside, his own face stared back at him, lifeless and pale. He awoke with a start, his body drenched in cold sweat. The watch on his table ticked softly, its hands frozen at midnight. As the days passed, Jonathan began to notice peculiarities with the watch. It seemed to have a mind of its own, its hands moving independently, always stopping at the same time, midnight. With each passing night, the distant sound of bells would echo through his home, their toll deep and somber, a harbinger of something dreadful. Jonathan soon realized that the bells were more than just an eerie coincidence. Each time they tolled, someone close to him would meet a sudden, inexplicable death. First, it was a colleague from work, then a neighbor, and finally, his closest friend, who had been helping him research the origins of the watch. Panic consumed Jonathan as he tried to rid himself of the cursed object. He threw it into a river, buried it in a remote forest, but no matter what he did, the watch always found its way back to him, its ticking growing louder, more insistent. Sleep became a luxury, as the fear of the watch and its inevitable toll of death haunted him day and night. Desperation drove Jonathan to seek answers in ancient tomes and through consultations with occult experts. He learned of a ritual, a dangerous and dark ceremony that could break the curse, but it came with a price. The ritual demanded a sacrifice far more precious than life itself, his soul. On the night of the ritual, Jonathan prepared himself for the final confrontation. He arranged black candles around the watch and drew arcane symbols on the floor of his dimly lit room. The bells began to toll as the watch struck midnight, their sound reverberating through the walls, shaking the very foundation of his home. With trembling hands, Jonathan recited the incantations, feeling his life force ebbing away, drained by the cursed timepiece. The room grew colder, darker, as if the shadows themselves were closing in on him. At the final stroke of midnight, the bells fell silent. Jonathan collapsed to the floor, his life extinguished, his soul claimed by the ancient curse. The watch lay beside him, its hands frozen, the curse seemingly broken. But in truth, it merely waited for its next victim. The following morning, Jonathan's lifeless body was discovered by the police. They attributed his death to a heart attack, unable to explain the terror etched into his face. The watch, deemed a mere trinket by the authorities, was sent to an antique shop along with his other belongings. Weeks later, a new customer entered the shop, drawn to the beauty of an old pocket watch. The watch sat in its velvet box, its golden surface gleaming faintly in the dim light. The cycle had begun anew, and the death clock waited, patiently, for its next owner, ready to claim another soul. The Mirror of Truth. The late afternoon sun bathed the cobbled streets of the small New England town in a warm, golden light. Emily, a young and inquisitive literature professor, wandered aimlessly, lost in thought. As she turned a corner, her eyes were drawn to a dusty storefront, a quaint antique shop nestled between larger, more modern establishments. It was the kind of place that promised forgotten treasures and secrets from another time. Without hesitation, Emily stepped inside. The interior of the shop was a labyrinth of old furniture, relics, and objects that seemed steeped in history. But one item, in particular, caught her attention, a large, ornate mirror, framed in dark, intricately carved wood. There was something about the mirror that drew her in, a strange sensation she couldn't quite explain. She approached it slowly, as though an unseen force was guiding her. "A curious piece, isn't it?" a raspy voice interrupted her thoughts. Startled, Emily turned to see an elderly man with piercing eyes watching her from the shadows. "Yes, it is fascinating," she replied, feeling a sudden unease. "This mirror has passed through many hands, each with its own tale to tell," the old man continued. "But let me offer you a word of advice. Some things are best left where they are." Emily ignored the warning. The mirror seemed to call to her, making her feel as though she was destined to possess it. Despite the man's cryptic caution and the chill that crept down her spine as he handed her the receipt, she purchased the mirror and brought it home. That night, Emily placed the mirror in her living room. The house was silent, and the moonlight filtered through the curtains, casting eerie shadows on the walls. As she passed by the mirror, something caught her eye, a dark figure in the reflection. She froze, but when she looked again, the figure was gone. Just a trick of the light, she thought, trying to quell the growing sense of dread. Days passed, and the mirror began to reveal things that defied explanation. One evening, while brushing her hair in front of it, Emily witnessed a chilling scene, her elderly neighbor, Mr. Parker, tumbling down a flight of stairs, his body lying lifeless on the pavement below. The vision was so vivid that she stumbled backward in horror. The next morning, the news of Mr. Parker's death, exactly as she had seen, shook her to her core. It was then that she realized the mirror did not merely reflect the present, it revealed the future, and always a future filled with death. Fear took hold of Emily's life. She tried to rid herself of the mirror, attempting to return it to the antique shop, sell it, even abandon it in the street, but each time the mirror inexplicably reappeared in her home. The visions continued, each one more terrifying than the last. Emily tried to intervene in some, but her efforts only led to greater tragedy, as if fate was mocking her attempts to alter its course. Desperation drove Emily to investigate the mirror's origins. She discovered that it had been crafted in the 18th century by an artisan obsessed with death, who had sought to foresee his own demise. However, the mirror had been cursed, and instead of showing the artisan his fate, it showed the deaths of others, condemning its owners to witness the inevitable end of those around them. Paranoia consumed Emily. Sleep eluded her, and when she did manage to close her eyes, her dreams were haunted by shadows and faceless figures. She distanced herself from friends and family, terrified that the mirror would reveal their deaths as well. Then, one night, the very thing she feared most came to pass. The mirror reflected her own death. The vision was murky but terrifying. She saw her lifeless body, eyes wide open in an expression of horror, surrounded by darkness. Panic set in. Emily tried to destroy the mirror, to shatter it into 1,000 pieces, but each time she raised something to strike it, an invisible force restrained her. It was as though the mirror dared her to try, knowing she lacked the power to destroy it. She could only watch, waiting for the moment when the reflection would become reality. Finally, in a state of exhaustion and despair, Emily resolved to confront the mirror. She stood before it, staring into its depths, waiting for the vision to clarify, to show her the exact moment of her demise. And then she saw it. She was in her own home, surrounded by darkness, with a sinister figure standing behind her, the same shadow she had glimpsed in that first reflection. But this time, the shadow moved. A chill ran down her spine, and as she turned to face the figure, she realized she was alone. Or so she thought, until she glanced back at the mirror and saw the figure advancing toward her from within its depths. The figure's eyes, dark and empty, locked onto hers as a cold, skeletal hand emerged from the mirror, reaching out to her. In a final act of desperation, Emily tried to flee, but the mirror held her fast. The room began to spin, the lights flickered, and everything plunged into utter darkness, accompanied only by the sound of her own scream, fading into oblivion. The next morning, the house was silent. Emily lay on the floor in front of the mirror, her eyes wide open in a frozen expression of eternal terror. The mirror remained intact, and in its reflection, there was nothing but an empty, cold room. The mirror had fulfilled its destiny once more, waiting patiently for its next victim. That's all for today's spine-chilling adventure. Did any of these stories give you goosebumps? Let me know in the comments. And if you're craving more horror, be sure to subscribe, hit the notification bell, and share this video with your friends. Together, we can build a community of horror lovers. Thanks for watching.